All right, well, I'm going to talk about trout spey in general and kind of after the cast, like what to do after you make those casts that George was talking about, and how to animate the fly um, when you're out fishing a streamer, or a woolly bugger or something like that. So this is 11-foot 3 weight, and I have a Skagit head on here and a 10-foot sink tip, and then you'd run 3-4 foot a leader off of that. And then I'd put whatever fly I decide. Now, one thing with a trout spey compared to streamer fishing with a single-handed rod is you're kind of limited on the size of fly. I mean, we can't throw a big lead-eyed, articulated fly on these little rods. So any of those little jig head woolly buggers or like little Sculpzilla or just a bunny leech, those all work great for these type of rods. If you try it too big of a fly, a lot of times it can be casted, but it's hard because then the anchor has to be just the fly because it's too much to get out of the water. So you have to be anchored. That's the only thing that can be on the water, which can be hard to cast that, throughout the day trying to throw that. So that's the first thing is you can only put a certain size fly. And most of them are like 4 to a size 8, olive, black, brown, whatever you want to use, or even a crawdad or whatever. But on trout spey, everybody, we like to spey cast and throw these long, great, beautiful casts way out there. But really, trout spey, sometimes I'm barely fishing the head out because I'm fishing a riffle or, a lot of the trout. Or like if you're going to fish a single-handed rod, sometimes you're not throwing it way out there. They're right in close, right? And so sometimes we forget about that. Well, all of a sudden we grab a spey rod and we start bombing casts way out there. Now, it's fun and you can get trout way out there, but a lot of times they're a lot closer in. And this will be the hardest part, like trying to use a spey rod and do a spey cast when I have this much line out. There's really no other way to do it other than just a roll cast, basically. So I'm just gonna go through how I would start. Like, we're gonna imagine this is a nice little riffle right here, a little faster water. But like my first cast, there might be a trout right here in close. So I'm just gonna do a roll cast out. And like that would be my first cast. And like I said, it's hard to do a snap tee or really a double spey because see, watch, if I try to do a double spey, my line's all over the place. But you want to do that cast sometimes, especially like I said, if it's a nice little riffle. So a lot of times I might just use this as a single-handed rod or just flip it out. And typically the first cast I'll do, I won't give it any action. I'm just going to let it swing, just like I'd be steelheading or any kind of wet fly swing. And then sometimes I won't change my length yet. I'm like, all right, I'm going to move my fly a little more, get it a little more animated, a little more movement. So you can do that by either stripping line like this, but letting the current pull it out. I'm not really stripping in. If it had a little more current, I could pulse it and the current would pull it back and forth. And so that would be one way to do it. There's a variety of ways. The other way, which can be easy, is I can just move my rod like this. And that'll make it move, like it's got some movement to it. And then as you let it swing, it might pick up a little speed as that belly comes around. And the difference between, like, for me, steelheading, I would always throw an angle, try to have tension on it, mend it, and let it swing down and across, nice and slow, current speed or a little slower. With trout, a lot of times you want to think of prey. You want to think it's trying to get away and get those trout to kind of react as that thing's trying to get away. So, like I said, some of these casts, I want a little more curve in my line as I'm like pulsing it, or I could even twitch it this way too. So that gives it a lot of action, especially when I get more line out. Now, if I tried all those different ways with that short cast, I'm like, well, maybe they're out a little farther, and I'll add like 2 strips of line and try another cast. Now I have a little more line, I can do a double spey, but it's really pretty slow because I have a short line. That's the other thing about these trout speys. This head's probably, a lot of times they're 16 to 18 feet instead of maybe 20 to 25 when you have a longer rod. So a lot of people might struggle if you grab a steelhead rod and then all of a sudden grab one of these. They're like 2 different animals. So it's real easy to kind of learn how to spey cast with a trout spey because it's real easy to lift this up so I can just sweep around and then go up. And then, like I said, first cast I'd probably just let it swing. It's kind of trying to figure out what they want, like one day, like they might not want it moved at all. I've done that where like, they just want it on the swing. And then another day it might be like, man, they're really liking it on that bounce today, you know, or one spot. So it's a lot of change-ups on the trout spey, which it can be kind of fun because you know, as a steelheader, you get used to just bombing it out there and, you know, letting it swing and then looking over here and looking around. And because, you know, that's part of fishing is kind of the steelheading is zoning out. Where with trout, you're kind of constantly moving the fly. At least I am if I got a streamer on, you know, one way or another doing this. I'll change it up constantly. So with those casts that we'll do, upstream or downstream casts, typically that cast I'm doing now, which would be a double spey, a lot of times I like doing that to help sink my fly. So see, I might do this and mend it. I'm trying to get a little sink to it. And then right maybe about now, if I had more current, see, then I'd get that broadside look as it's coming from some depth coming out. And then I would give it some twitches as that thing's coming out of there. The funny thing is a couple years ago on my river on the Deschutes, it's kind of funny. It's sad because we had to close for steelhead. We didn't have enough fish, but we were doing a lot more trout spey. And I don't know how many times with my clients, we're fishing little riffles. We're trying to stay out of the steelhead water, but we were doing this and twitching our fly a lot. We hooked like 5 or 6 steelhead doing this. And I'm like, maybe we're doing it wrong. Because we're so used to not touching our fly, but as we were animating it, we were hooking steelhead. So, but yeah, but typically a double spey is going to be more of my cast across. And a lot of times I'm trying to sink my fly a little bit. I'm going to give it a little time to kind of soak or sink down. And then typically in a riffle or in that situation, I might have to get it moving again because I'll get hung up. So I would throw almost a downstream in and just give it that broadside look. And then, like I said, either swinging or animating your fly somehow. So then the other cast you would do would be an upstream cast. Now, one thing with this cast, if the wind's blowing upstream, this is not a great cast. So if I had an upstreamer in right now, and even with a short head, I can probably get away with it. But see, a lot of times if the wind's blowing, it's going to end up back here behind me. And then the fly's going to come up and hit me. So just remember this, there's upstream side and downstream side just for environmental, either tree or wind. But the other cast we would do is called a snap T. And so this is an upstream cast because I'm going to put my fly upstream and then my angle is going to change. See, I'm going to be down here and it's going to come under tension a lot sooner. So that way I can animate my fly a lot quicker without, I'm not thinking about getting it as deep. And so that way I'm right on it and I'm moving the fly right away. Where this one it's soaking or sinking a little bit. And that could be water temperature, you know. In the winter it's a lot colder. Sometimes it might be sinking a little more. In the summer when they're in the faster pocket water, a lot of times I could do that angle of cast snap T upstream, you know, across, and then be moving it right away. Just pulsing it along. Now, like I said, that's kind of the fun part of using a trout spey is all the different ways. I mean, I've tried all sorts of things, and it seems like almost all of them work one time or another. Then as we add a little more line out, sometimes like if I was in a little riffle, that might be the longest cast I make. Just because past that, it might be a, you know, class 3 rapids. So that's the thing to think about with a trout spey. We're not always throwing like 60-foot casts out there to cast. You can in some areas, but don't forget the little spots, you know, the little, like a spot you would fish a dry fly or a dry dropper or maybe nymphish. Those are the same spots you can catch them on a trout spey. And like I said, start like way up in the riffle. I mean, like I said, a lot of casts we do in the first little part might be only this much. And we'll catch a lot of trout sometimes just on that first shot in there. Any questions on that? No question, not a single one. George confused everybody.
Can you redo that cast from your left side?
Sure, so this would be cack-handed is what you would call it. Now you can either, I'm naturally left-handed, so if you were left-handed, you'd have your left hand on top and right hand on the bottom. And the hardest part of a snap T is kind of getting your fly up enough to do this C right here. See how I did that? That originally came from, George usually talks about this, but that originally came from this. Like I used to catch his fly at those, like a show. His name was Tom White, and he was kind of like my hero in the sense that he would show me stuff all the time when I was kind of a fly shop kid, you know, and he was like, oh, this is kind of a cool trick, you know, and some guys saw that. And and then they made that into a spey cast. But it's really just like lifting to get resistance off the water, and then it's a change of direction, and I'm getting my rod out of the way so I don't hit my rod tip. And that can be the hard part too. If somebody goes like this, it'll hit the rod right there. So it's kind of up, out, down, and away. And then my anchor's up here, and then see, I'm set up for my cast right here. So that way I can load the rod all the way around and then out. And that's an angled, more of an angle cast. It's harder to throw that across. But that's a snap T. And so then cack-handed is what you would call that. So you'd have your right hand on top. And this one can feel a little more awkward. But same thing, I'm back down here, and then you'll sweep around off your left shoulder and then out. Yeah, sure. If the wind's blowing upstream, I would always do a snap T. Just because, like I said earlier, if I do any kind of downstream cast, when I come around, that loop's gonna come too close. And that's just dangerous, I mean, it happens there. And it could be like, I've done it where I'm like, all right, I'm gonna cast, and they're like, oh, bail, because the wind's coming out at me, and I'm like, oh, I better start over. And you just gotta make sure, same thing with your anchor, if it's too high or, too far past you, if you did a double spey, you don't wanna go. Like if my fly's way up here, I don't wanna go at all either, because see, now it's gonna come right in my face. But with these shorter trout speys, it's pretty forgiving, in the sense of like, it doesn't take much to lift this up here. But also the hard part, it's hard to keep it anchored. If I go like my normal stroke, I'm already moving this thing around. So you got to be real easy with it, which can be kind of fun, because it's just real rhythmatic, kind of slow, and then you just give it a little power at the end. It doesn't take much, compared to a 26-foot or 20-foot Skagit head. And the same thing with what George was talking about, overhang. Sometimes if you're having problems with anchor, I use this a lot when I'm guiding. If somebody's struggling with their anchor, I'll just have them, like a lot of people want to do this, and they'll strip this right up at the tip top. Most of these cast better if you leave out a little bit. They throw a little better, and sometimes that gives you a little more length for anchor. But I'll go out of, that'll be a long cast a lot of times, but you can see I can get much more movement out of that once I get a little longer cast. And then I'll be able to twitch and make that fly have a lot more movement as it's coming across. So don't be afraid to really animate that fly. If you're fishing a sculpin, or like I said, if you're fishing like a Scandi line and a soft tackle, then it's just more traditional wet fly swing. You'd be doing this snap T and just letting it swing with like a little caddis pupa or, some kind of little soft tackle or a Baetis or something like that. But I wouldn't give it any animation. But like I said, the funnest part with trout spey, if you've been steelheading or something, is all the different, moves you can make your fly do. And I've even done casts where I'm literally almost streamer fishing. I mean, I'll throw it up there and then just like get it in a spot, and I'm like, oh, that looks pretty good. And just stripping it across. So there's, like I said, there's multiple ways you can do this. So the difference is that on a Skagit head, we have a sink tip, right? So a lot of times we only want 3 or 4 feet. Now with the Scandi line, since it's got more of a front taper like a dry fly line, then you could put a mono leader, like a 9-foot 3X or 4X. Sometimes you typically want it a little longer just because that's part of your anchor. Or there's other options going like a poly leader, which is a plastic coated mono type leader. And they do have those where they're like floating, intermediate, sinking. Some of them sink a little bit, which is nice to throw a soft tackle because then it'll be down like that much instead of being right at the surface. It'll help keep it down a little bit. So you have those options with the Scandi. But typically, if you were just going with a mono leader, it'd be like 9 or 10 feet. And then, see, if you're using a poly leader, you'd be back at this again. Because the poly leader is part of your leader, and then you would just want a little short 3-4 feet off of it. We don't want too much off of it. I mean, if you go much longer, then to me your sink tip is down here, and then your fly is a little bit, it's too far away from it. The poly leader, a lot of them will have a loop at the end or a swivel where you can attach a leader to it. And then usually I'd use, like if I was going to fish soft tackle or caddis poop, I'd use like, 4X, just, this much, and then put my fly on that, whatever I was going to use. So yeah, the poly leader is going to be your main anchor, your main leader. If you go with just straight mono, then you want at least 10 feet, 9 or 10 feet. Like a 9-foot 3X is nice, and then you can put a little tippet on there, and then you're about right. Yeah. Any other questions? Any other casts you want to see? No? Okay, that's about it for me. George goes long, I go short. Yeah, no problem.